The rain had been falling for hours, turning the park's gravel paths into narrow ribbons of mud. The street lamps glowed hazy yellow through the mist, casting long shadows over the benches where puddles gathered like tiny mirrors. Officer Daniel Ruiz tugged his jacket tighter, muttering under his breath about his luck with the night shift. Dispatch had sent them here for what was, on paper, a nuisance call. Vagrant sleeping in Elmhurst Park. Complainant says he's been there for days. Possibly aggressive. Ruiz had handled plenty of such calls. Most ended with a quiet warning, sometimes a trip to the shelter. But as he and Officer Tasha Graham rounded the bend near the central fountain, he froze. The man on the bench was still as stone. His long coat soaked through, hair a tangled mess. His hands were clasped together, not like a man protecting himself from cold, but like one lost in thought, deep, deliberate thought. The rain ran down his face in streams, and he didn't even blink. "Sir," Ruiz called out, stepping closer. "Park's closed. You can't stay here." The man's head lifted slowly, his gaze locking onto Ruiz's with unnerving steadiness. There was no hostility there, only an almost clinical observation, as though Ruiz were the one being studied. "I'm not staying," the man said, his voice low, unhurried. "Just waiting." "For what?" Tasha asked, already reaching for her radio. He smiled faintly, not warmly, not coldly, but as though the question amused him. "You'll know soon enough." When Ruiz reached out to guide him up, the man rose without resistance. Standing now, Ruiz could see he was tall, maybe 6'2". His posture still sharp despite the years carved into his features. His coat was threadbare, his boots split at the seams, but his eyes, they didn't belong on a street drifter. They belonged in a boardroom. At the precinct, standard procedure meant fingerprinting him for identification. The machine beeped, and then another tone followed, sharper, insistent. A red notification flashed across the screen. Match found. Adrian Hawthorne, declared deceased, 15 years ago. Ruiz stared at the alert, then at the man before him. "This can't be right," he muttered. The man's smile widened just enough to be unsettling. "Looks like you've found what I was waiting for." 15 years earlier, the Hawthorne estate looked like something out of a painting. 30 acres of perfectly manicured gardens, a private lake that shimmered under the sun, and a mansion whose stone walls had stood for nearly a century. It wasn't just a home. It was a statement, a declaration of power. Adrian Hawthorne was 32 then, tall, fit, with the kind of charisma that made him as much a celebrity as a businessman. He was heir to Hawthorne Global, a conglomerate spanning real estate, tech, and luxury goods. He could walk into a shareholders' meeting in a wrinkled shirt and still walk out with unanimous applause. The public adored him. The press dubbed him the people's billionaire. He spoke at charity galas with the same warmth he brought to employee town halls. He had a gift for making everyone feel like the most important person in the room. But behind closed doors, the air in the Hawthorne mansion was far colder. Adrian's father, Richard Hawthorne, had built the empire with ruthless efficiency, and he expected his son to rule it the same way. Adrian's younger brother, Vincent, was more in line with that vision. Sharp-tongued, calculating, willing to cut anyone loose if it improved the bottom line. Adrian had other ideas. He wanted Hawthorne Global to pivot toward sustainable ventures, invest in green energy, and create foundations for education in underprivileged areas. Vincent called him a dreamer, and not as a compliment. The tension came to a head in the summer of 2010, during the company's largest merger to date. Adrian opposed the deal, suspecting the partner company of laundering money. Richard dismissed his concerns. Vincent pushed it through. 2 weeks later, Adrian vanished. It happened without warning. One evening, he left the Hawthorne Tower in Midtown, telling his driver he'd walk the last few blocks to his penthouse. Security cameras caught him entering a side street, and then nothing. No demands for ransom, no signs of foul play. The police searched for months, but the case grew colder by the week. 3 years later, the court declared him legally dead. Vincent took over Hawthorne Global. Richard retired. The empire marched on. But not everyone believed Adrian was gone. Some whispered he'd staged his disappearance to avoid some scandal. Others claimed he'd gone off-grid to live among the common people he always championed. A few insisted darker forces had silenced him. The truth was far stranger. It began, as disasters often do, with something that seemed harmless at first. A meeting. The Hawthorne Tower boardroom was a glass-walled capsule on the 72nd floor, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. It was meant to inspire awe, but Adrian had always found it a bit like standing in a fishbowl, exposed, vulnerable. On that Thursday morning, the table was crowded with lawyers, executives, and the two men who had shaped his life. Richard Hawthorne at the head, Vincent at his right hand. Adrian sat across from them, hands clasped to hide the tremor in his fingers. He had spent the past month quietly collecting evidence, emails, financial statements, internal memos, all pointing to one conclusion. The proposed merger with Stonebridge Industries wasn't just risky, it was criminal. He knew Stonebridge's CEO, Leonard Cole, by reputation. A charming predator. Cole's offshore accounts were a spider's web of shell companies, and Adrian had traced payments that suggested organized crime involvement. If this deal went through, Hawthorne Global's pristine reputation would be shackled to a sinking, dirty ship. Gentlemen, Adrian began, sliding a folder across the table. I'm going to make this simple. This merger is poison. These documents detail the connections Stonebridge has to. Vincent didn't even look at the folder. We've already vetted them. Not like I have, Adrian shot back. Look at page 3. Wire transfers to. Richard slammed a hand on the table, silencing the room. Adrian, enough. This deal is final. You will vote in favor or you will step aside. The words landed with a heaviness that made the air feel thinner. Step aside. It wasn't just a rebuke. It was a threat. I can't, Adrian said, his voice low but steady. And if you push this through, I'll take what I know to the authorities. That was when he saw it. A flicker, quick but unmistakable, in Vincent's eyes. Not fear. Something colder. Calculation. The meeting adjourned with forced civility. But that night Adrian noticed things. A black sedan parked across from his penthouse building. A shadow that seemed to linger too long in the reflection of a storefront window. His driver telling him the schedule had been changed by Mr. Vincent's office, without his consent. On the third night, someone tried to break into his apartment. The lock was picked, the latch broken, but nothing was taken. A warning. Adrian called his oldest friend, Marcus Quinn, a former investigative journalist who'd left the profession after one too many threats. Marcus agreed to meet him the next evening to go over the evidence and plan a safe way to expose it. They never made that meeting. As Adrian left the Hawthorne Tower after work, a man brushed past him, brief, almost polite, and Adrian felt a sharp sting in his arm. The world blurred. His knees buckled. Voices rose and fell around him like waves crashing far away. When he woke, he was lying on a damp floor in an abandoned warehouse. The dim light flickered from a single bulb, swaying on its cord. In the shadows stood Vincent. You should have listened, Vincent said, stepping forward, his voice as smooth as ever. But you had to play hero. Adrian tried to move, but his muscles felt heavy, slow. You'll disappear tonight, Vincent continued, and no one will ever find you. Officially, you'll be a tragic mystery. Unofficially, well, let's just say you won't be in a position to interfere again. Vincent turned and left, his footsteps echoing. Minutes later, two men dragged Adrian outside, loaded him into the back of a van, and drove into the night. But fate had other plans. Somewhere along the industrial docks, the van swerved violently. Tires screeched. A crash. Adrian was thrown against the wall of the cargo space and then nothing. When he came to, the van was on its side, its windshield shattered. The driver's seat was empty. He staggered out into the darkness. The docks deserted. The city skyline distant and cold. He was alive for now. But he knew two things. If he went to the police, Vincent's reach would silence him before he even filed a report. If he stayed in his old life, he'd be dead within a week. So he walked away. From his name. From his home. From everything. The holding cell at the 14th precinct was a narrow rectangle of cinder block and steel, smelling faintly of bleach and rain-soaked clothes. A fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting intermittent shadows on the faces of the night's detainees. Adrian sat alone on the bench in the corner, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped. His coat steamed faintly as the dampness met the overheated air. He didn't pace. He didn't complain. He didn't even look particularly uncomfortable, just observant. Detective Olivia Harper stood outside the bars, her arms folded. She'd been on the job for 11 years, and she could read people well enough to know when someone was hiding behind a mask. This man's mask wasn't the grimace of a drunk or the jitter of a junkie. It was refined, purposeful. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. Name? Adrian. His voice was calm, even warm. Adrian's fine. Last name? He smiled faintly, like the question was almost a private joke. Haven't needed one in a long time. Harper glanced at the tablet in her hand. The system says otherwise. Says you're Adrian Hawthorne. As in the Adrian Hawthorne. As in legally dead, missing for 15 years. You have any idea how many man-hours were spent looking for you? Too many, he said softly. And all wasted. Harper took a seat opposite him, sliding the chair close enough that their knees almost touched. Why don't you tell me why a man with your history is sleeping on a park bench in Elmhurst at 2 a.m? Because, Adrian said, leaning back slightly, you can't be followed when you're already nowhere. Harper's brow furrowed. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters, he replied. If I'm invisible, I'm safe. If I'm safe, other people stay alive. There was something in his tone. Not self-pity, not paranoia, but conviction. It made her pause. You're telling me you disappeared for someone else's safety? Adrian's gaze shifted to the barred window, where faint traces of rain still clung to the glass. Not telling you, just reminding myself. Harper studied him for another moment, then tapped her fingers on the tabletop. All right, Adrian, let's play your game. You've been gone for a decade and a half. Your family thinks you're dead. Your company's been run by your brother since you vanished. If you were really in danger, why come back here at all? Why risk getting caught? He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something unguarded there. A flicker of urgency. Because I can't run forever, he said. And because someone out there knows I'm still alive. You didn't arrest me by chance, detective. You were sent. The words landed like a dropped weight. Harper leaned in. Sent by who? Adrian's lips curved into a wry smile. That's the question, isn't it? Before she could press further, a sharp knock came at the door. Sergeant Mills stepped in, looking uneasy. Detective Harper. Captain wants him processed and released. Now. Harper's jaw tightened. On whose orders? Mills hesitated, then said, They didn't give a name, just said it came from high up. Adrian's expression didn't change, but his eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. Told you. The room Harper chose wasn't an interrogation room, at least not officially. It was a storage space on the 3rd floor, long since cleared out except for a table, 2 mismatched chairs, and a buzzing wall clock that had been stuck at 4:17 for years. She preferred it for conversations she didn't want logged in the precinct's database. Adrian sat across from her, posture straight, hands folded neatly. His soaked coat hung over the back of the chair, and without it he looked even more out of place. The crispness of his gestures, the faintly precise way he spoke, as though each word was weighed before release. You've got 15 minutes before someone upstairs comes breathing down my neck, Harper said. Use them wisely. Adrian tilted his head, as if deciding where to start. When you spend 15 years off the grid, you learn something about people, detective. You learn that the ones with the least to their name are often the ones with the most to lose. And the ones with everything will burn the world to keep it. "You're talking about your family?" Harper asked. "I'm talking about a machine," Adrian replied. "My family just happens to own one of the bigger cogs in it." Harper leaned back. "Then let's hear it. Start from when you disappeared." For a moment, his eyes drifted, as if replaying scenes only he could see. "I walked away with nothing but a bank card and the clothes on my back," he said. "But the moment I tried to use the card, I'd be traceable. So I cut it up. Slept my first night in an alley 3 blocks from the tower. That was the first time I understood how loud a city is when you've got nowhere to go." He told her about drifting, first to the harbor districts, then to small towns where nobody asked questions. He'd work odd jobs for cash. Fixing fences, hauling scrap metal, repairing broken radios. "A billionaire scrubbing dishes in a diner for $20 and a meal," he said with a faint smile. "It's amazing how invisible you become when you look like you belong nowhere." Harper listened, arms crossed, searching for the spaces between his words. Why stay invisible? You could have gone to the press, blown the whistle on whatever your brother was doing. "That would have lasted about as long as this conversation," Adrian said. "Vincent's not just a CEO. He has partners, the kind who don't care about collateral damage. When I first disappeared, I thought I was protecting the company from them. Then I realized I was protecting the people around me from ending up dead." Something in his tone made Harper pause. "People around you? Or one person in particular?" Adrian didn't answer right away. He just tapped his index finger twice on the tabletop, a small, unconscious rhythm, then met her gaze. "Marcus Quinn, the journalist?" Harper asked. Adrian nodded. "He was the only one I trusted with the evidence. And he paid for it." "What happened?" "He vanished a month after I did. No body, no trail. Just gone." Adrian's voice didn't break, but there was a raw edge under it. "If they could get to him, they could get to anyone, including you, detective. Which is why this conversation is already dangerous." Harper's instincts told her he wasn't bluffing. She'd seen people bluff fear before. This wasn't it. "You think someone set you up to be arrested tonight?" she said slowly. "I know someone did," Adrian replied. "The question is whether they want me silenced or watched." The knock at the door came sooner than she expected. "Sergeant Mills again." "Detective. Captain's orders." "He walks. Now." Harper looked at Adrian. "If I let you go, you disappear again?" "Not this time," he said, a strange glint in his eyes. "Not until this is finished." "And what exactly is this?" Adrian stood, slipping his coat back on. "Let's call it the end of a very long game." The precinct was quiet by the time Harper returned to her desk, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the space between the occasional ringing phone. Most of the night shift was on patrol. The few left inside kept their heads down, buried in paperwork. She opened her laptop and keyed in Hawthorne Global. She wasn't naive. She knew the public story. What she wanted was the buried one. The official records painted the Hawthornes as royalty of the corporate world. Decades of growth, philanthropic gestures, glossy magazine covers. Vincent Hawthorne had been hailed as a savior for steering the company into emerging markets. The disappearance of his older brother had been framed as a personal tragedy, not a business advantage. But the more Harper dug, the more the patterns emerged. In the year following Adrian's death, Hawthorne Global had executed 3 massive acquisitions, 2 in industries with historically high money laundering potential, one involving a foreign energy conglomerate tied to shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. Then there were the political donations. Millions funneled to super PACs and lobbyists with ties to lawmakers who'd later vote down financial transparency bills. Harper's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just greed. It was strategic insulation, building a fortress around something worth hiding. Her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She hesitated before answering. "Harper." A man's voice came through, deep and gravelly. "Detective Harper, if you value your career and your life, you'll stop looking into Hawthorne Global." She straightened. "Who is this?" "You don't need to know. Just walk away." You won't like what you find. The line went dead. Harper sat frozen for a moment before locking her screen. She'd had threats before, but there was something in this one, an unspoken certainty that they already knew exactly where she was sitting. She decided to go old school. No more digital trail. She pulled her jacket on, grabbed a notepad, and left the precinct. At the city's public records building, Harper pulled the Hawthorne corporate filings for the last 15 years. It was tedious work, sifting through line after line of shareholder reports, SEC disclosures, merger contracts. But there were gaps. Incomplete board meeting minutes. Transactions listed as confidential despite involving publicly traded companies. She jotted names she didn't recognize. Stonebridge Industries, the company Adrian had warned about, still appeared in subsidiary form, now under a different shell name. Leonard Cole was nowhere in the official records, but she found a Leonard M. Cole listed as an independent consultant for a Hawthorne subsidiary in Singapore. Then came the kicker, a short-lived nonprofit registered by Hawthorne Global 5 years after Adrian vanished. Its stated mission was community redevelopment, but its entire board consisted of individuals tied to offshore accounts. The nonprofit dissolved after only 11 months, coinciding with the disappearance of Marcus Quinn, the journalist Adrian had mentioned. Harper leaned back, the weight of it settling in. Marcus wasn't collateral damage. He was erased. By the time she returned to the precinct, Captain Dwyer was waiting at her desk, his bulk blocking her chair. "Harper, you've been making inquiries," he said flatly. "It's called police work," she replied. "Not when it's about Hawthorne Global. Not when I'm getting calls from City Hall and the DA's office telling me to rein you in." Harper's pulse quickened. "You're saying they're protecting him?" "I'm saying," Dwyer said, lowering his voice, "you need to let this one go. We don't have the budget or the backup for the kind of trouble that comes with poking this bear." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence was answer enough. As he walked away, she noticed something on her desk. A folded piece of paper that hadn't been there when she left. Inside was a single line of handwriting. Pier 47. Midnight. Come alone. There was no signature, but she didn't need one. The fog rolled in thick off the water, shrouding Pier 47 in a cold, damp stillness. The only sounds were the slow creak of mooring ropes and the occasional splash of something unseen in the harbor below. Harper kept her hand near her holster as she moved between the stacked shipping crates, her eyes scanning for movement. The pier had been abandoned for years, ever since the shipping company that owned it folded in bankruptcy. Now it belonged to seagulls, rust, and, apparently, ghosts from the past. A shadow detached itself from the mist. "Adrian, you're early," he said quietly. "I didn't think you'd mind," Harper replied. Adrian studied her for a beat. "You've been digging. I have enough to know you weren't imagining any of this," she said. "Stonebridge never went away. They just changed their skin. And your brother? He's still in bed with them." Adrian gave a slow nod. "And that means you've put yourself on their radar. Which is why we can't meet like this again." "Not until we bring them down," Harper countered. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "This isn't a drug ring or a mob crew you can bust with a warrant. This is a syndicate with political cover, law enforcement moles, and offshore pipelines so tangled it would take years to untangle, if you lived that long. Then tell me why you've been hiding instead of taking your evidence to someone who can." Adrian's eyes hardened. "Because the first person I took it to vanished. Marcus Quinn. I gave him everything. Emails, wire transfers, proof that Stonebridge was laundering money through Hawthorne Global for a criminal network called the Marlowe Group." Harper frowned. "Never heard of them." "You wouldn't," Adrian said. "They don't advertise. They're a loose alliance of facilitators, arms dealers, money launderers, corrupt lobbyists. They move their profits through legitimate companies to keep themselves untouchable. Hawthorne Global became one of their largest laundromats. And your brother runs it for them," Harper guessed. "Runs it, expands it, and insulates it," Adrian confirmed. Marcus was going to publish a story tying Marlowe Group money to congressional campaigns. 2 days before the piece went to press, he disappeared. I got a message the next day. Stay gone or he's dead. I didn't know if he was already dead. I still don't. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly through the fog. Harper and Adrian both turned toward the pier's entrance. Expecting anyone? She asked. No, Adrian said. 3 figures emerged. 2 men in dark coats, one holding what looked like a camera bag but moved like it weighed more than cameras. The third man walked between them, his posture too deliberate for a dock worker. His face was partially shadowed, but Harper caught the glint of a smile. Leonard Cole, Adrian said under his breath. Cole's voice carried easily across the damp air. Adrian Hawthorne, alive and well. You've caused us a great deal of trouble, my friend. Harper shifted her weight. Friend? That's what you call kidnapping and attempted murder. Cole chuckled. Detective Harper, you're out of your depth. But you're in luck. My associates are merciful. All we want is for Mr. Hawthorne to return to the quiet little grave he dug himself 15 years ago. Not happening, Adrian said flatly. Cole's smile didn't waver. Then perhaps your detective friend can help persuade you. The 2 men flanking him reached inside their coats. Harper's hand went for her gun, but Adrian's grip clamped on her wrist. Not now, he whispered. We walk away tonight, or we don't walk away at all. They backed toward the far end of the pier, Cole's men following. Harper could feel the calculation in Adrian's movements. He was looking for something. An exit. An opening. It came in the form of a shrill horn and the blinding sweep of a cargo ship's searchlight cutting through the fog. Cole's men instinctively turned toward the light. Adrian shoved Harper behind a crate and bolted into the mist, pulling her with him. By the time the searchlight passed and Cole's men regrouped, the pier was empty. In the safety of an alley several blocks away, Harper leaned against the wall, catching her breath. You planned that? Adrian's mouth curved into that same faint, infuriating smile. I've been using that ship's midnight arrival for cover for years. You learn patterns when you live in the shadows. And Cole? She asked. He won't stop. Now that he's seen us together, you're part of this. Adrian met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't calculation. It was resolve. Then we hit them first, Harper said. The plan came together in whispers, scraps of paper, and burner phones. Adrian didn't trust anything digital. Harper didn't trust anyone on the force. They both trusted one thing. If they waited, they'd be dead. They started with Cole. Adrian knew that Cole couldn't resist a lucrative opportunity, especially if it came from someone inside his own network. Using names from his memory of the Marlowe Group, Adrian created a fake investment pitch. A supposedly desperate Eastern European contact offering access to a government infrastructure fund in exchange for a laundering pipeline. It was dirty, it was dangerous, and it was exactly the kind of bait Cole bid on. All they needed was to arrange the meeting in a place they could control. Harper used a favor from an old vice detective to secure an abandoned warehouse that had once been a police sting site. It had hidden camera ports, soundproofing, and, most importantly, an unregistered landline connected to an off-site recorder. The night of the meeting, Harper waited in a small observation room behind a 2-way mirror, her headset linked to Adrian's concealed mic. She dressed him for the part. Pressed suit from a thrift store, shoes polished until they looked almost new, hair trimmed to the sleek, confident style of the man he used to be. When Cole arrived with 2 of his men, his eyes flickered with recognition and suspicion. Adrian, Cole said, his voice dripping with mock warmth. Resurrected and suddenly in the market for business again? Adrian poured himself a drink from the bottle on the table, moving with the unhurried grace of someone in complete control. Let's say I've been reconsidering my retirement. Cole sat, waving his men to the far wall. Then let's talk numbers. And they did. Or rather, Cole did. He talked about percentages, offshore accounts, moving funds through charitable fronts, all in explicit detail. Harper's pulse quickened as the recorder captured every word. But Cole wasn't careless. He watched Adrian with predator's eyes, waiting for the slip. And then, The door banged open. Vincent Hawthorne stepped inside. Harper's heart slammed in her chest. Adrian didn't turn, didn't need to. He'd felt the room change. "Brother," Vincent said smoothly, "I was wondering when you'd finally crawl out of your hole." Cole leaned back, smirking. "Told you he couldn't resist." Adrian's expression didn't falter. "Funny. I was thinking the same about you." Vincent walked around the table, his hands resting lightly on the back of Adrian's chair. "You could have stayed gone, Adrian. You could have lived out your sad little exile in peace. But you had to come back. And now you've dragged this detective into our family business." Harper's stomach twisted. He knew about her. Adrian finally turned to face him. "This isn't family business. This is organized crime with a corporate logo." Vincent's smile thinned. "You always were sentimental. That's why you lost." Adrian leaned forward, voice steady. "No, Vincent. This time you did." He tapped the small microphone hidden in his lapel. Vincent's gaze flicked to Cole, then to the corners of the room. Too late. Harper was already out the back, sprinting toward the off-site recording unit with the evidence. Cole's men moved first, reaching inside their jackets, but Adrian was already on his feet, flipping the table to break their line of sight. Chaos erupted. A shot rang out, shattering a light. In the half-dark, Adrian drove his shoulder into Vincent, sending him crashing into the wall. Sirens wailed in the distance, Harper's insurance policy. She tipped off 2 reporters and a federal contact to meet her at a safe house. By the time local units arrived, the feds would already have the tapes. Cole and his men slipped away in the confusion. Vincent wasn't so lucky. Harper had sent the feds his GPS coordinates before leaving the pier 2 nights ago. They'd been shadowing him ever since. When the dust cleared, Vincent was in cuffs, shouting threats. Adrian just stood there, breathing hard, rain dripping from the hole in the roof above him. For the first time in 15 years, he wasn't hiding. It started with a whisper in a reporter's ear and ended with the world staring at their screens in disbelief. The first outlet to break the story was the Sentinel, a mid-tier investigative news site that Harper trusted because they didn't scare easily. Within hours, the bigger names pounced. The Times, The Guardian, the major U.S. networks. The headlines varied in tone, but the story was the same. Hawthorne Global CEO arrested in criminal conspiracy. Missing brother found alive after 15 years. The footage was damning. Clips from the warehouse meeting, captured in crystal-clear audio and video, played on a loop. Cole and Vincent detailing offshore laundering schemes. Vincent's smug admission that Adrian had been removed from the picture years ago. It was the kind of smoking gun prosecutors prayed for. But the public latched onto a different part of the story, the human drama. The photos of Adrian, gaunt but standing tall, contrasted with the glossy corporate images of Vincent in tailored suits. News anchors dissected the brothers' Shakespearean rivalry. Social media turned #HomelessBillionaire into a global trend. Some romanticized Adrian as a noble exile returning to take down corruption. Others whispered conspiracy theories. Maybe he'd faked his disappearance to stage this very moment. Adrian didn't care. The truth was out. That was enough. Hawthorne Global's board went into emergency session the same day Vincent was denied bail. The stock price cratered within hours, and federal auditors raided 3 of the company's key offices before nightfall. Cole vanished. No flights, no border crossings, no digital trace. Adrian knew better than to think he'd gone for good. Cole was a survivor. But without Vincent's protection, his empire was crumbling. Harper's contacts in the financial crimes unit told her the investigation could take years. But the most immediate effect was brutal. Thousands of employees were blindsided by layoffs as contracts evaporated and partners fled. It was a strange kind of justice, clean on paper, messy in reality. 3 days after the arrest, Harper convinced Adrian to give a statement. Not to the press corps, not to a TV network, to the small crowd gathered in the community shelter where he'd spent the last year of his missing life. Standing behind a podium someone had borrowed from the local high school, Adrian addressed them without notes. "I've been gone a long time. he began, his voice quiet but carrying. Some of you knew me as a name in the papers. Some of you knew me as the man sleeping on the bench in the park. Both of those men were me. Both of those men are still here. He didn't talk about revenge. He didn't talk about money. He talked about choices, about the way power bends people if they let it, and about the way survival strips you down to what really matters. By the time he stepped down, a hush hung over the room. Even Harper, who'd been with him through every step, felt something shift. The next morning, Adrian received a call from the interim board of Hawthorne Global. They wanted him back, not as a figurehead, but as CEO. It was everything he had once dreamed of. The throne was his for the taking. He turned them down. "Build it without me," he said. "If it's worth building, you don't need a Hawthorne at the top." Instead, he asked for something else. The transfer of a fraction of the company's liquid assets into a fund for the shelter network and community programs that had kept him alive. He didn't negotiate, he just stated it. To his surprise, they agreed. The park hadn't changed much. Same cracked fountain. Same row of weather-worn benches. Same rusted swing set squealing in the wind like it was protesting its own existence. But to Adrian it felt different. Not because the park had changed, but because he had. The last time he'd walked through here, he was invisible. A man in ragged clothes with a blanket rolled under his arm, shuffling between shadows so as not to draw the wrong kind of attention. Now, people recognize him. A few passers-by did double takes, whispering to each other. Someone even raised a phone to snap a photo before pretending they hadn't. He ignored them and kept walking until he reached his bench. The one under the gnarled oak, where the light broke through the branches in thin, fractured beams. The one where Harper had first spoken to him, breaking through the fog of his self-imposed exile. There was someone sitting there already. An older man, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big, clutching a paper coffee cup like it was a treasure. His hair was matted. His eyes sharp in a way that said he'd learned to scan a crowd before trusting it. Adrian stopped. He could have asked him to move, could have found another spot. But instead, he lowered himself onto the far end of the bench. "Cold morning," Adrian said. The man glanced at him, then looked back at the ground. "It's August," he muttered. "Still feels cold sometimes," Adrian replied. That got a slight nod. After a few minutes of silence, Adrian reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. He didn't hand it over, just placed it between them on the bench. The man frowned. "What's this?" "A start," Adrian said. "Or an escape. Your choice." Inside was a prepaid card loaded with enough to cover 6 months of rent in a small apartment, plus a handwritten note with the address of the shelter that had helped him. The man didn't pick it up right away. He just stared at it, then at Adrian as if trying to guess the catch. "There's no hook," Adrian added. "Just don't vanish unless you want to." When Adrian stood to leave, the man still hadn't touched the envelope. That was fine. He knew from experience that some decisions needed to sit for a while. As he walked past the fountain, a boy of about 7 ran past him, chasing a pigeon. The bird took flight in a frantic swirl, and for some reason, Adrian smiled. He hadn't realized until that moment that the park no longer felt like a prison yard. It was just a park again. Harper was waiting for him at the edge of the park, leaning against her car with her arms crossed. "Well?" she asked. "Well, what?" "You got what you wanted. Vincent's gone. The company's clean, or at least cleaner. You've got your freedom. What now?" Adrian looked back at the oak, the fountain, the man in the coat. "I don't know yet," he said. "But for the first time in a long time, that's okay." Freedom had a strange taste. Not sweet, like Adrian had imagined when he used to dream of escaping the concrete walls of Vincent's empire. Not bitter, like he'd feared when thinking about the wreckage left behind. It was quiet, and quiet he'd learned could be dangerous. Cole Maddox had always been a shadow in Vincent's world. Part fixer, part enforcer, part rumor. When Vincent fell, everyone assumed Cole had gone down with him, except Adrian. Cole wasn't the type to get caught. And if he wasn't caught, then he was still out there. The first sign came in a folded piece of paper slid under Harper's office door. 2 words, written in block capitals. Not over. No date. But the paper smelled faintly of the brand of cigarettes Cole always carried. A cheap, harsh blend that clung to everything it touched. Adrian could have called the police. He could have ignored it. Instead, he went to the only place he knew Cole might show up. The old shipping yard on the east side, the one Vincent had used for quiet meetings. It was deserted, except for a figure leaning against a rusted container. Cole. Same leather jacket. Same watchful eyes. "You're hard to find," Cole said, lighting a cigarette. "I wasn't hiding," Adrian replied. Cole exhaled a slow stream of smoke. "See, that's your problem. You think you're done. But men like us, we don't get done. We get replaced. Or erased." Then Cole did something unexpected. He offered Adrian a deal. "There's money left," he said. "Vincent had stashes you don't know about. I know where they are. We split it. Walk away. Nobody needs to bleed." Adrian stared at him. "And if I say no?" Cole smiled without warmth. "Then I walk away alone. And maybe you wake up one night with someone standing over your bed." It took less than a second for Adrian to decide. "No," he said simply. Cole's smile faded. He flicked the cigarette away, grinding it into the concrete. "Shame," he said. Then he turned and walked into the shadows between the containers. Adrian didn't follow. He didn't need to. Some men were storms. You couldn't stop them, you just prepared for when they came back. By the time Harper's car pulled up, the yard was empty. "Well?" she asked. "He's gone," Adrian said. "For now." Harper frowned. "That's not very comforting." "It's not meant to be." As they drove away, Adrian glanced in the side mirror. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure watching them from the dark, but it could have just been the shadows playing tricks. Either way, he knew one thing. The story wasn't over. It had just stopped for a while. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen counter, glinting off the polished marble. Adrian stood there barefoot, coffee in hand, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. It still felt strange. Waking up in a bed that wasn't in a shelter, not hearing the shuffle of dozens of tired bodies, not smelling burnt coffee and day-old bread. Harper said he still moved like a man expecting to be chased. Maybe she was right. 3 months after Vincent's arrest, Adrian published a book. It wasn't a memoir in the usual sense. No self-congratulations, no dramatic embellishments. Just the truth. The rise, the disappearance, the years in the streets, and the return no one expected. The title was simple. The Man Who Came Back. It sold well enough to make headlines, but Adrian didn't care about sales. It was therapy, a way of putting the ghosts in order. Every Sunday, without fail, Adrian returned to the same park where the police had first arrested him. The same bench, the same view of the pond. Sometimes people recognized him. They'd stop to say hello, or to tell him they'd read his book. Sometimes they asked for advice. Sometimes they just wanted to sit in silence beside him. It became a ritual, a way of remembering that life could turn in a moment, and that one moment could be the start of everything. It happened on a gray afternoon in October. Adrian was leaving the park when he noticed a man in a dark coat standing across the street. He didn't move. He didn't wave. He just watched. And then, as Adrian blinked, the man turned and disappeared into the crowd. That night, Adrian stood on his balcony, city lights stretching into the horizon. Somewhere out there, Cole Maddox still walked free. Somewhere out there, another game was being set in motion. But for now, he was home. And home, for a man who had once been lost, was more than enough. Sometimes you survive to tell the story. Sometimes you survive because you still have another one left to live.